Hey everybody, welcome back. Today we're taking a look at one of my favorite shooters ever, and that's Strikers 1945 for the Sega Saturn. It was developed by Psikyo and published by Atlus in 1996, and it's also available for the PlayStation. It was not released outside of Japan at the time, but the sequel was released in the US and Europe under the title Strikers 1945. I've reviewed a couple of Psikyo shooters in the past, like Gunbird and Sengoku Blade, so if you've seen those, then you know how much I like their games. Also, before we go on, I'll just point out that this game bears a striking resemblance to the Sonic Wings series by Video System, and that's because Psikyo was formed by former Video System employees, and it really shows in the gameplay and presentation. As far as gameplay goes, Strikers 1945 doesn't really do anything that hadn't been done before, especially when you take Sonic Wings into account, but everything it does pretty much perfectly. It's an incredibly fun and addictive shooter that blends World War II with robots and spaceships, and that's a game that sells itself, really. You've got 6 different WW2 era planes to choose from that all have different fire modes, different super bombs, varying speed and handling, and support options that can be charged up and used as power shots. Again, a different kind for each plane. So there's a ton of variety, and I personally like playing through this game with one ship and then jumping over to another and starting all over again, because not only does this game offer a lot of variety by shooter standards, it also plays really well regardless of whether or not you're using a standard Saturn control pad or an arcade stick. Strikers controls perfectly, the hit detection is very precise, and there are a ton of difficulty settings if you want more or less challenge, and this can certainly be a very challenging game, especially as you progress into the space levels. Also, just like any other Psikyo shooter, the first handful of stages are in completely random order, which is a feature that I've always liked. It just further mixes things up a bit. So for all the reasons I just went over, this is one of my favorite shooters to play on the Saturn. It's incredibly fun and about as good as they come. The presentation is where you could argue that Strikers falters in spots, though I still think it's really good overall. A lot of stages, while there's nothing really wrong with them, they can be a little bit stock. Lots of military bases and airplane hangars, stuff like that, until you get into outer space and even flying to the moon, which is when things get more interesting visually. Still nice visuals overall, and some really great boss designs. Lots of giant robots and warships, which look really cool. Again, the contrast of World War II airplanes and futuristic robots and spaceships is something that always made this game stand out to me. The sound design is also good, but again, nothing too terribly breathtaking. The soundtrack itself is mostly fairly slow-paced music with a lot of military-style drums and more epic kind of action movie-sounding arrangements, which matches the look and era that the game is set in, but it doesn't exactly get my blood pumping. But then again, screaming guitars and pounding techno synth beats wouldn't really match up well with a World War II era shooter. And the sound effects are at least really good. Lots of nice explosions and realistic sounds coming from the aircrafts themselves. All in all, while the presentation in Strikers is a tad bland, especially when compared to games like Sengoku Blade and Gunbird, which have much more colorful and imaginative settings, it still doesn't take away from the fact that this is a very well-made shooter that keeps me hooked for hours on end. So this is a game that I highly recommend to shooter fans, especially if you've enjoyed Sonic Wings or any of the other shooters by Psikyo. This is one of their absolute best. It's not so expensive by Saturn shooter standards. The Saturn version can be found online usually for no more than $40. And like I said, the sequel was released on the PlayStation in North America and Europe, and it's also really good and goes for about the same price. Plus, Strikers games can also be found as part of shooting collections for the PS2 and PSP. If you think you're ready to board a P-51 Mustang and take on some giant robots in space, then you're ready for Strikers 1945. It's awesome.